The heat from the flames licked at my skin as I stood there, my clothes soaked in gasoline, my body trembling. I could feel the hatred in their eyes, the mob surrounding me with torches and rage. The smell of fuel filled my nostrils, and I knew I had mere seconds before they would light the match that would end my life. In that moment, with death so certain, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Mother Mary, into your hands I commend my spirit." And then, the impossible happened. The match struck. The flame touched my gasoline-drenched shirt. But instead of consuming me in fire, the flames danced around my body like a protective shield, never touching my skin, never burning even a single hair on my head. I opened my eyes to see the crowd backing away, their faces twisted in disbelief and fear. Some fell to their knees, others ran. And through the dancing flames, I swear I saw her, a silhouette of light, arms outstretched, protecting me from harm. But to understand this miracle, I must take you back to where it all began, to explain how a small-town pastor from Minnesota ended up facing death in a remote village halfway across the world. My name is Thomas Riley. I was born and raised in Rochester, Minnesota, the son of a mechanic and a nurse. Our family wasn't particularly religious during my childhood. We attended church on Easter and Christmas, but faith wasn't the cornerstone of our home. That changed when I was 16, and my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 3 months to live, and our world shattered. During those dark days, my mother found solace in prayer. She would spend hours with her rosary, whispering to the Mother of God when the pain became unbearable. I didn't understand it then, how she could place her trust in something unseen when medicine had failed her. But I watched as peace gradually replaced the fear in her eyes, even as her body continued to waste away. 6 months passed, then a year. The doctors couldn't explain it. The cancer hadn't disappeared, but it had stopped spreading. My mother lived for 5 more years before passing peacefully in her sleep. Her last words to me were, "Thomas, she has plans for you. Our Lady has plans for you." I dismissed those words initially. After graduating high school, I pursued a business degree at the University of Minnesota. I dated, partied, and lived the typical college life, pushing thoughts of faith and my mother's devotion to the back of my mind. After college, I landed a job at a marketing firm in Minneapolis. My life seemed set, good salary, apartment downtown, promising career path. But something was missing. A hollowness I couldn't explain haunted me. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, feeling as though I had failed at something crucial, though I couldn't name what it was. The emptiness followed me through board meetings and dinner dates, persistent and unrelenting. On the 5th anniversary of my mother's death, I found myself in the small Catholic church she had attended during her final years. I didn't plan to go there. My feet simply carried me to its doors. Inside, an elderly woman was praying before a statue of the Virgin Mary, her lips moving silently, fingers working through rosary beads. Something about her reminded me of my mother, and I found myself sitting in the back pew, watching. "She's been waiting for you," the woman said suddenly without turning around. Her voice carried clearly across the empty church. "Excuse me?" I replied, startled. The woman turned, and I saw her face was lined with wrinkles, her eyes a pale blue that seemed to see right through me. "Our Lady. She's been waiting for you to remember your mother's words." A chill ran down my spine. I had never told anyone about my mother's last words to me. "How did you—" "Some things are known by the heart, not the head," she said simply, and returned to her prayers. That night, I dreamed of my mother. She stood in a field of white lilies, looking younger and healthier than I had ever seen her. "It's time, Thomas," she said, smiling. "Time to follow her call." The next morning, I resigned from my job. 3 months later, I entered seminary. My friends thought I had lost my mind, trading a 6-figure salary and corner office for a life of service. Perhaps they were right, but for the first time in years, the hollowness inside me began to fill with purpose. Seminary wasn't easy. Doubts plagued me. Was I truly called or merely honoring my mother's memory? The intellectual rigors of theological study sometimes felt at odds with the simple faith my mother had embodied. But whenever uncertainties threatened to overwhelm me, I would find myself before a statue of Mary, and a calm would settle over me, a reassurance that I was exactly where I needed to be. After ordination, I expected to be assigned to a parish in Minnesota. Instead, my superior called me into his office with surprising news. "We've received a request for assistance from a mission in Ecuador," he said. "They need someone with your background." "My background?" I asked, confused. "In marketing," he smiled. "The mission serves several remote villages that have been targeted by illegal logging operations. The local priests have been working to help the villagers protect their land rights, but they're facing increasing hostility. They need someone who understands how to navigate corporate interests while maintaining the mission's spiritual focus." "I don't speak Spanish," I protested weakly. "You'll learn," he replied, "and they speak a local dialect anyway. Besides," he added, his eyes twinkling, "I get the feeling you've been called there for reasons beyond our understanding." 2 months later, I arrived in Quito with 2 suitcases and a Spanish-English dictionary. After a week of orientation, I traveled to the mission of Santa Maria de la Selva, nestled between the Andes and the Amazon basin. The journey took 12 hours by bus, followed by 4 hours in a rugged jeep driven by Father Miguel, my new colleague. Father Miguel was a sturdy man in his 60s with calloused hands and kind eyes. As we bounced along dirt roads that seemed more suitable for goats than vehicles, he explained the situation. "The logging companies want the mahogany and cedar," he said, his accent thick but his English clear. "They offer the villages money, more money than they've ever seen. But when the trees are gone, so is the water, the animals, the way of life. Some villages have agreed to sell, others resist." "And that's where the trouble comes from?" I asked. Father Miguel's expression darkened. "The companies hire men from the cities, tough men. They make examples of those who resist." "Examples?" "Last month they burned the home of a village elder who spoke against them. The month before, a teacher was beaten. We document, we report to authorities, but out here," he gestured to the vast greenery surrounding us, "out here, the law is what men with guns say it is." I swallowed hard, wondering what I had gotten myself into. "Don't worry, Padre Thomas," Father Miguel said, noticing my discomfort. "Our Lady watches over her children in the jungle. You'll see." The mission consisted of a small church, a clinic staffed by 2 nuns who were also nurses, a school building, and living quarters for the mission staff. From this base, we served 12 villages spread across hundreds of square kilometers of difficult terrain. My days quickly filled with learning, Spanish in the mornings, the local Quechua dialect in the afternoons, and in between, accompanying Father Miguel and Sister Maria on visits to the villages. I was humbled by the faith I encountered. These people, who had so little in material possessions, possessed a spiritual wealth that made me feel like a novice. They prayed with a fervor and sincerity that reminded me of my mother in her final days. In the evenings, villagers would gather in small churches or community buildings, candlelight flickering on their faces as they recited the rosary, their voices blending in a melody of devotion that seemed to rise up through the canopy of trees to the stars above. But beneath this spiritual harmony, tensions simmered. 3 months into my stay, a new logging operation began near one of our most remote villages, Agua Clara. The company, International Forestal, had secured permits through questionable means, according to the villagers who came to the mission seeking help. "They say the papers are signed by our chief," explained Carlos, a community leader from Agua Clara. "But our chief has been dead for 2 years." I accompanied Father Miguel to meet with representatives from the company. The meeting took place in a hotel in the nearest town, a 4-hour drive from the mission. The company sent 2 men, a lawyer named Sergio Mendez, who spoke perfect English and wore an expensive suit despite the humidity, and a silent companion whose suit jacket bulged suspiciously at the waist. "The permits are in order," Mendez said smoothly after we presented our concerns. "If the villagers have issues, they should take them up through proper legal channels." "The proper legal channels are a 3-day journey away," Father Miguel replied, his voice tight, "and your operations begin tomorrow." Mendez smiled, showing perfect white teeth. "Business waits for no man, Father, not even God's representatives." As we left, the silent man caught my arm. "Be smart, American priest," he whispered. "Some places even God doesn't see what happens to those who interfere." That night I couldn't sleep. The man's threat played in my mind on repeat. Father Miguel seemed unfazed when I told him about it. "They always threaten," he said, making the sign of the cross. "But we answer to a higher authority." The next day we learned that Mendez had visited Agua Clara, offering cash payments to villagers who would support the logging. Half the village had accepted. Families were now divided, neighbors refusing to speak to each other. "This is how they operate," Father Miguel explained as we drove toward the village the following morning. "Divide the community, then conquer the forest." Over the next weeks, the situation deteriorated. Trees began falling at the edge of Agua Clara's territory. The stream that supplied their water turned brown with silt. Children developed rashes and stomach ailments from the contaminated water. We organized peaceful protests. I used my marketing background to contact environmental organizations and journalists, sending them photos and documentation of the illegal operations. A small victory came when a judge in Quito issued a temporary stay on the logging. 2 days later, the clinic at our mission was broken into. Medicines were stolen and a message was painted on the wall. "Next time it won't be drugs we take." Father Miguel insisted on continuing our work. "If we show fear, they win," he said. But fear had taken root in me. I jumped at shadows, startled at every unexpected sound. In my prayers I begged for courage, for the faith that seemed to come so naturally to Father Miguel and the villagers we served. Some nights I considered contacting my superiors, requesting a transfer back to the safety of Minnesota. But each morning, I would see the statue of Mary in our small church and remember my mother's words, "She has plans for you." 6 months into my mission, the pivotal moment arrived. We received word that armed men had entered Agua Clara, forcing the villagers to gather in the central clearing. They were demanding that the community leader, a woman named Elena, who had been vocal in opposing the logging, publicly sign a document supporting the company's operations. Father Miguel, Sister Maria, and I immediately set out for the village. The journey was tense, each of us lost in our own thoughts and prayers. When we arrived, we found about 30 men surrounding the gathered villagers. Some carried machetes, others had rifles slung over their shoulders. At the center of the clearing stood Elena, her chin raised defiantly as Sergio Mendez held a document before her. Our arrival caused a stir. Mendez's face darkened when he saw us. "This is a private business matter," he called out. "The church has no place here." Father Miguel strode forward, seemingly oblivious to the weapons around him. "Where God's children are threatened, the church belongs," he replied firmly. I followed behind him, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Sister Maria moved among the villagers, quietly checking on children and elderly people who looked distressed by the confrontation. What happened next unfolded with frightening speed. Elena tore the document from Mendez's hands and ripped it in half. One of the armed men stepped forward and struck her across the face with the back of his hand, sending her sprawling to the ground. Father Miguel moved to help her, and another man raised his rifle. "Stop!" I shouted, stepping between them. "This is not the way to resolve anything." Mendez gave me a cold look. "This seems to be the only language these people understand, Father Riley. Perhaps you need a lesson too, to take back to your superiors." He nodded to his men. 3 of them grabbed me, dragging me to the center of the clearing. I struggled, but their grip was like iron. The villagers began to cry out, some trying to come to my aid, only to be pushed back by the armed men. "Let him go," Father Miguel demanded, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Your quarrel is with me, not with him," Mendez laughed. "My quarrel is with anyone who interferes with my business." He turned to me. "You Americans think you can come here and play savior. Let's see if your God protects you now." One of the men produced a jerry can and began pouring its contents over me. The sharp smell of gasoline filled my nostrils, burning my eyes. I gasped, trying not to inhale the fumes as the cold liquid soaked through my clothes, plastering them to my skin. "Stop this madness," Father Miguel pleaded. "He's done nothing to you." "He's done everything," Mendez replied. Made calls to journalists, contacted environmental groups, sent evidence to the authorities. A troublemaker. And troublemakers need to learn lessons that others will remember. The clearing had gone silent except for muffled sobs from some of the villagers. I saw Sister Maria gathering the children, turning their faces away from the scene. Father Miguel was being restrained by 2 men, his face contorted in anguish. "Last chance, Father Riley," Mendez said, producing a book of matches from his pocket. "Tell your superiors to withdraw from this region. Tell them International Forestal has legal rights to these forests, and the church should concern itself with souls, not trees." Despite my terror, a strange calm began to settle over me. I thought of my mother, of her unwavering faith even as cancer ravaged her body. I thought of the villagers, their lives and futures hanging in the balance. And I thought of Mary, the mother who had guided me here to this moment. "I cannot do that," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "These people in this land are under God's protection, as am I." Mendez's face hardened. "We'll see about that." He struck a match. Time seemed to slow. I saw the small flame dancing on the matchstick. I heard Father Miguel's voice raised in desperate prayer. I felt the gasoline heavy on my skin, ready to ignite. And in that moment of pure terror, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Mother Mary, into your hands I commend my spirit." The match touched my shirt. I heard the whoosh of ignition, felt the heat surround me. But the searing pain I expected never came. I opened my eyes to see flames dancing around me, moving like a living thing yet never touching my skin. The gasoline burned, but it burned around me, not on me, as if an invisible barrier separated my body from the fire. Gasps and cries erupted from the crowd. The men who had been holding me let go and stumbled backward, their faces masks of shock and fear. Some fell to their knees, others made the sign of the cross. Through the dancing flames, I saw Mendez's face, his arrogant smile replaced by disbelief. And then I saw her. Not clearly, not in the way one sees another person standing before them, but in the movement of the flames, in the play of light and shadow. I saw the outline of a woman with arms outstretched, a mantle flowing around her as if in a gentle breeze. The vision lasted only seconds before the flames began to die down, having consumed the gasoline without consuming me. As the last flames flickered out, I stood unharmed, not a blister on my skin, not a hair singed, though my clothes were scorched and blackened. The smell of burnt gasoline hung in the air, but beneath it was another scent. Roses, sweet and out of place in the jungle clearing. It was the same fragrance I had detected years ago in my mother's hospital room, on those nights when her pain subsided enough for her to sleep peacefully. A scent I had noticed occasionally in the seminary chapel during my most doubt-filled nights. I looked down at my hands, expecting to see charred flesh, but they were untouched. My black clerical shirt had burn patterns that resembled the outline of a protective embrace, as though invisible arms had shielded my torso from the flames. Where the gasoline had soaked through to my chest, the fabric had burned away to reveal a small silver medallion, my mother's miraculous medal that I wore on a chain. It gleamed in the sunlight, untarnished by smoke or fire. Silence fell over the clearing. Even the birds and insects seemed to have quieted, as though nature itself stood in reverent awe. The only sound was the soft weeping of an elderly woman at the edge of the gathering, her gnarled hands clutching a rosary, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Then Elena stepped forward, her cheek still red from the blow she had received, a thin trickle of blood running from the corner of her mouth. Her eyes, however, shone not with pain, but with wonder. "La Madre de Dios," she said, her voice filled with awe as she reached out a trembling hand toward my shoulder, but stopped short of touching me, as if I had become something sacred. "She has shown us a miracle." A young boy broke from his mother's grasp and ran to me, touching my still warm sleeve with curious fingers. "He's not burned, Mama," he cried out. "The fire didn't hurt him." Her words and the child's innocent confirmation broke the spell that had held the crowd motionless. The armed men began backing away, their weapons lowered, some making the sign of the cross with shaking hands, others simply turning and fleeing into the forest as though pursued by invisible forces. One man fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, his machete abandoned in the dirt beside him. Mendez stood rooted to the spot, his face ashen, all arrogance stripped away. His carefully maintained facade of control had shattered, revealing the frightened man beneath. His eyes darted from me to the scorched ground around my feet, to the sky, and back to me again, as if searching for some rational explanation that would not come. This is some trick," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, now disheveled with sweat. "Some American technology, some chemical that neutralizes fire. It has to be." Father Miguel walked forward, free now that his captors had fled. His face was streaked with tears that carved clean lines through the dust on his weathered cheeks. He touched my shoulder with reverence, his fingers trembling against the charred fabric. "No trick," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "A miracle, a sign from heaven itself. I have served in these forests for 30 years, and never have I witnessed such a manifestation of divine protection." He turned to face Mendez, standing taller than I had ever seen him, a newfound authority resonating in his voice. You came with weapons and threats, with money and corruption. She came with fire that does not burn and love that does not falter. Which power do you think will prevail in these forests, Senor Mendez? The villagers moved forward, surrounding me in concentric circles, many reaching out to touch my blackened but intact clothing, as if to confirm for themselves that I was truly unharmed. Some wept openly, their sobs a strange counterpoint to the expressions of joy on their faces. Others fell to their knees in prayer, their voices rising in a spontaneous chorus of thanksgiving that seemed to ripple through the clearing like a breeze through tall grass. An ancient woman, her face as lined and textured as the bark of the oldest trees, pushed her way through the crowd with surprising strength. In her hands, she carried a clay bowl filled with clear water. Without speaking, she dipped her fingers into the water and made the sign of the cross on my forehead. The cool touch of the water against my skin broke something inside me, a dam of emotion I had been holding back. I fell to my knees as the reality of what had just happened crashed over me in waves. I had been prepared to die. I had offered my life, surrendered completely, and in that surrender had found not death but the most profound affirmation of life and protection. Tears streamed down my face as the old woman continued her blessing, murmuring words in a dialect even older than Quichua, a prayer that seemed to rise from the forest floor itself. Mendez and the few remaining company men retreated to their vehicles, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of confusion and fear. Before climbing into his gleaming SUV, Mendez turned to me one last time, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice lacked conviction, the threat hollow and empty against the weight of what had transpired. I rose to my feet, feeling a strength and certainty I had never known before. "Yes," I replied gently, "I think it is." As their vehicles disappeared down the rutted forest road, a silence fell over the gathering once more. Then from somewhere in the crowd, a voice began to sing Ave Maria. Another voice joined, then another, until the entire clearing resonated with the ancient hymn of praise to the Mother of God. The melody soared above the canopy, echoing back from the distant mountains as if the landscape itself had joined the chorus. Sister Maria approached me, her medical bag in hand, concern etched on her face despite having witnessed the miracle. "Let me examine you," she insisted, ever the practical nurse even in the face of the supernatural. "You may be in shock." I submitted to her examination, watching as she checked my pupils, my pulse, looked for any signs of burns or injury. Her practiced hands moved with professional detachment, but I could see the wonder in her eyes, the struggle between her medical training and the undeniable evidence before her. "Perfectly normal," she finally pronounced, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Your heart rate is elevated, but given the circumstances—" She trailed off, then added in a whisper, "It's impossible. The temperature of burning gasoline is high enough to cause third-degree burns within seconds. Your clothes are burned, but your skin—" She touched my arm gently as if to reassure herself once more. "Not even reddened. Dios mío, it truly is a miracle." One of the village elders, a man named Joaquin, whose weathered face spoke of a lifetime under the jungle sun, approached with a bundle of clean clothes. "For you, Padre," he said, offering them with a small bow. "Your garments have served their purpose as witness to the miracle. Now you must be comfortable." I accepted the gift with gratitude, suddenly aware of the state of my clothing, charred, reeking of burnt fuel, hanging in tatters in some places. Father Miguel led me to a small hut at the edge of the clearing, where I could change in private. Inside the simple structure, I carefully removed the ruined clothes, examining each burned patch, each scorched thread. These were evidence, I realized, not just of danger averted, but of divine intervention made manifest. I folded them reverently, knowing they must be preserved. The new garments, a simple white shirt and dark pants, felt cool against my skin. Before leaving the hut, I knelt in prayer, trying to find words adequate to express the gratitude that overflowed from my heart. But words failed me. Instead, tears came again, and I surrendered to them, letting them speak what language could not. When I emerged, the village had transformed. The central clearing, which had been a place of threat and violence just an hour before, now buzzed with purposeful activity. Women were preparing food, men arranging logs for a bonfire, children running with armfuls of tropical flowers. Father Miguel stood talking with Elena and other village leaders, their conversation animated. "They're preparing a vigil of thanksgiving," Sister Maria explained, appearing at my side. "Word has already been sent to the other villages. By nightfall, hundreds will gather here." She hesitated, then added, "They're calling it the miracle of the living flame. Already the story is growing. Some say they saw the Virgin herself standing in the fire with you." "Did they?" I asked quietly, remembering the silhouette I had glimpsed through the dancing flames. Sister Maria studied my face. "Did you?" I considered the question carefully. "I saw something, a presence, a protection. I cannot describe it more clearly than that." She nodded, accepting this. Sometimes the deepest truths resist our attempts to confine them in words. That night, the villagers of Agua Clara held a vigil unlike anything I had ever experienced. As darkness fell, the bonfire was lit, its flames reaching toward the star-filled sky. Around it gathered not only the people of Agua Clara, but visitors from villages hours away, who had traveled through the jungle on foot or by boat upon hearing of the miracle. Their faces glowed in the firelight, expectant, transformed. I was asked to recount what had happened. Standing before the assembled crowd, I felt a strange mixture of humility and certainty, as I described the sensation of the flames around but not upon me, the scent of roses, the glimpse of a protective presence. As I spoke, I noticed children being lifted onto their parents' shoulders for a better view, elderly villagers leaning forward to catch every word, young men and women holding hands as if drawing strength from one another. "But this miracle is not about me," I concluded, my voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "It is about all of us, about this forest, about the sacred trust we have been given to protect this land and each other. Today, Our Lady showed us that the weakest among us, a foreign priest who still stumbles over your language, can stand unharmed against those who bring threats and violence. How much more can we accomplish together, with her protection and our unity?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elena stepped forward, the firelight accentuating the bruise that had formed on her cheek. "Today, I witnessed 2 miracles," she said, her voice strong despite her injury. "The first we all saw, Padre Thomas standing unharmed in fire. The second was in the eyes of our enemies as they fled. For the first time I saw fear in the faces of those who have threatened us for so long. Not fear of us, but fear of something greater than all of us." She turned to me. "Your God, our God, has shown us that we are not forgotten." As the night progressed, people came forward to share their own experiences, moments when they had felt protected, guided, or comforted by a presence they could not explain. An elderly man described being lost in the forest for 3 days, following what he thought was a woman in a blue cloak who led him back to his village. A young mother told of her child's inexplicable recovery from a snake bite that should have been fatal. A teenager spoke of hearing a woman's voice warning him away from a section of river just before a flash flood swept through. Each story added a thread to the tapestry of faith being woven around the fire. I listened, amazed at how my own experience had unleashed this outpouring of testimony. It was as if a dam had broken, allowing long-held beliefs to find voice and shared expression. In the firelight, I noticed Father Miguel sitting slightly apart from the crowd, his expression thoughtful. I made my way to his side, settling on the log beside him. "You're quiet," I observed. He nodded, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. "I am listening, learning." He turned to me. "I have served these people for decades, Thomas, and tonight they share stories I have never heard. Stories they perhaps felt too shy or uncertain to tell before, or that they feared would not be believed. And now? Now they have seen with their own eyes what their hearts have always known." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "You know, when the bishop sent word that an American priest was coming to assist us, I was skeptical. I thought, what can this gringo know of our struggles? How can he connect with people whose language and customs are so different from his own? I worried you would impose American solutions on Ecuadorian problems." I chuckled. "All valid concerns." "Yes," he agreed with a small smile, "but I see now why you were sent here. Some messengers must come from far away to be heard." Before I could respond, a commotion at the edge of the clearing drew our attention. A group of men had arrived, their expressions tense, their clothes bearing the logo of International Forestal. For a moment, fear rippled through the gathering. Had Mendez returned with more men, more weapons? But as they approached the fire, I recognized the man in the lead, the worker who had fallen to his knees sobbing after the miracle. Now he walked with purpose, his face set with determination. Behind him followed 6 others, all employees of the logging company. He stopped at the edge of the firelight and called out, "We come in peace. We come seeking understanding." Father Miguel and I rose to meet them, the crowd parting to let us through. Up close, I could see the man's reddened eyes, the tension in his shoulders. "I am Juan Carlos," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This morning I held you at gunpoint, Father." He addressed me directly. "This afternoon I saw something I cannot explain, something that has shaken everything I believed." He gestured to the men behind him. "We have all seen it, and we cannot return to our work as if nothing happened." Father Miguel stepped forward. "What are you saying?" Juan Carlos straightened his shoulders. "We resign from International Forestal, all of us. We will not be part of destroying what God and the Virgin clearly protect." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. "This is a copy of the true operations plan for this region. It shows that the company knows the permits are fraudulent. It proves they have bribed officials. It reveals their intent to clear-cut 5 times the area they publicly claimed." He held out the paper. "Use it however you must to stop them." I accepted the document, feeling its weight in my hands. Not just the physical paper, but the courage it represented for these men to turn against their employer, the risk they were taking. "You understand the danger of what you're doing?" I asked quietly. Juan Carlos nodded. "After what I saw today, I fear God more than I fear Mendez." That simple statement, delivered with quiet conviction, struck me as profound. Here was the true miracle, not just that I had been spared from the flames, but that hearts were being transformed by what they had witnessed. "You are welcome here," Elena said, stepping forward. "All of you. If you need sanctuary, we offer it freely." In the days that followed, something remarkable happened beyond the spiritual awakening in the communities. News of the miracle reached Quito, then spread throughout Ecuador and beyond. Journalists arrived, first from local papers, then from national outlets, and finally from international media. They interviewed villagers, took photographs of my burned clothing, and pressed me for details I could barely articulate. I struggled with the attention. My training had prepared me to serve humbly, not to stand at the center of a media storm. But Father Miguel helped me see the opportunity this presented. "The world now watches what happens here," he explained, as we sat in the mission's small kitchen, drinking strong coffee and planning our next steps. "Use this visibility to protect what matters," and so I did. When television cameras arrived, I guided reporters not just to the site of the miracle, but to the areas where illegal logging had devastated the landscape. I introduced them to villagers whose water had been contaminated, whose traditional medicinal plants had been destroyed, whose children suffered respiratory problems from the constant burning of cleared vegetation. International Forestal executives in Quito initially dismissed the miracle story as indigenous superstition exploited by foreign priests. But their position became untenable when Juan Carlos and his colleagues went public with their testimony and documents. 3 weeks after the miracle, the company's stock plummeted. A week later, government inspectors arrived to investigate the allegations of fraud and environmental violations. The documents Juan Carlos had provided proved decisive. They revealed not only fraudulent permits, but a systematic campaign of bribery, intimidation and environmental cover-ups spanning 5 years and multiple forest concessions throughout Ecuador. What had begun as a local conflict in Agua Clara exploded into a national scandal that reached the highest levels of government. Mendez disappeared before he could be arrested, reportedly fleeing to Paraguay. The CEO of International Forestal resigned in disgrace. The company's logging permits were officially revoked after a judge reviewed evidence of their fraudulent procurement, and a formal apology was issued to the affected communities, along with a promise of remediation funds. But the true miracle was not in these practical victories, though they mattered deeply. It was in the transformation that swept through the communities we served. Villages that had been divided by the company's tactics found paths to reconciliation. People who had accepted money from the logging interests returned it, asking forgiveness from their neighbors. Families that had been torn apart by disagreements over whether to resist or accommodate the loggers reunited around shared tables. A new unity formed among the 12 villages our mission served. Leaders from communities that had historically been rivals began meeting monthly to coordinate their forest protection efforts. Young people who had planned to leave for cities instead committed to staying, developing sustainable businesses, based on forest products that didn't require cutting trees: honey, medicinal plants, ecotourism, traditional crafts. Elena, whose defiance had sparked the confrontation that led to the miracle, emerged as a powerful leader. With support from environmental organizations that had learned of our story, she established a women's cooperative that created and marketed natural products derived from sustainable forest harvesting. Within a year, their botanical soaps and remedies were being sold in boutiques in Quito and exported to specialty shops in the United States and Europe. As for me, I was changed in ways I'm still discovering. The hollow space that had haunted me since my mother's death was gone, filled now with a certainty I had never known before. I understood, finally, what she had meant with her last words. Our Lady had indeed had plans for me, not just to serve in this mission, but to be a living testament to her protection. The scent of roses became a constant companion in my life, appearing at unexpected moments, during prayer, in moments of doubt, when comfort was needed. Sometimes I would wake in the night to find my small room filled with the fragrance, though no flowers grew nearby. It became a personal sign, a reminder of the thin veil between ordinary reality and divine presence. My burned clothing, carefully preserved, became an unofficial relic. We kept it in the mission's small church, and pilgrims who came to hear the story often asked to see or touch it. Many brought their own stories of intervention and protection, adding to the tapestry of testimonies that continued to grow around what had happened in Agua Clara. Physical changes accompanied the spiritual ones. The mission expanded its work. With newfound donations and support, we built a proper medical clinic where Sister Maria could treat patients with better equipment and medications. Our school expanded to offer classes through secondary level, so children no longer had to leave their communities for education. A small library was established, filled with books in Spanish and Quechua about ecology, indigenous rights, and traditional knowledge. On the site where the miracle occurred, the villagers built a small shrine to Our Lady of the Forest, as they came to call her. It was a simple structure, open to the elements on all sides, with a roof of palm thatch and a central altar made from a massive section of tree trunk that had been naturally hollowed by age. Inside this natural niche stood a statue of Mary, carved by local artisans from a single piece of cedar salvaged from a tree that had fallen naturally in a storm. What made the statue remarkable was its design. Unlike traditional depictions of the Virgin, this Mary wore no crown, no elaborate robes. Instead, she was dressed simply, like an indigenous woman of the forest, her clothing adorned with seeds and flowers native to the region. In her arms, she held not just the Christ child, but also a small sapling, symbolizing new life and growth. Her face, serene and strong, combined features from various ethnic groups that made up the local population: indigenous, mestizo, Afro-Ecuadorian. The shrine became a pilgrimage site, not just for Catholics, but for people of various faiths who felt drawn to the story of protection and transformation. On the anniversary of the miracle, hundreds gathered for a special mass, followed by a procession through the forest. Elena and other community leaders took the opportunity to educate visitors about their ongoing work to protect the forest and preserve their way of life. 3 years have passed since that day in the clearing. I remain at the mission of Santa Maria de la Selva, though my role has evolved. I spend less time in administrative work now and more in spiritual direction, helping pilgrims and visitors process their experiences and questions. The miracle opened something in me, an ability to listen deeply to others' spiritual journeys, without judgment or prescription, to sit with mystery rather than always seeking explanations. Father Miguel's health began failing about a year after the miracle. His body, which had served faithfully through decades of rigorous mission work, finally began to surrender to age and exhaustion. He moved to a care facility in Quito run by his religious order. Though he visits when he can, his eyes still bright with the fire of purpose, despite his physical frailty. Sister Maria continues her work in the expanded clinic, training local women as health workers who can provide basic care in the most remote villages. Under her guidance, infant mortality in our region has dropped dramatically, and preventable diseases have been significantly reduced. She never speaks about the miracle directly, but I've noticed she keeps a small vial of ashes from my burned clothing beside her medical equipment, and sometimes I see her touch it before treating particularly difficult cases. Juan Carlos and the other former logging company employees have integrated into the communities they once threatened. Some work as forest guards now, using their knowledge of logging operations to help identify and prevent new incursions. Others have developed sustainable forestry practices that allow for selective harvesting without destroying the ecosystem. Juan Carlos himself married a woman from Agua Clara and now leads ecotourism expeditions that emphasize both the natural and spiritual significance of the region. The attention our story attracted has had broader implications. Environmental organizations have used our experience as a rallying point for forest protection throughout Latin America. Indigenous communities facing similar threats have drawn courage from what happened here. Legal reforms, strengthening native land rights and environmental protections have been enacted, partly in response to the public sentiment our story generated. Of course, not all is perfect. New threats emerge. Different companies with different tactics attempt to access the valuable resources of the forest. Political winds shift, sometimes blowing against the progress we've made. But the communities now stand on firmer ground, legally, economically, and spiritually. Sometimes I think about Mendez, wondering where he is, whether the events of that day changed him as profoundly as they changed the rest of us. I pray for him often, hoping that the fear I saw in his eyes as he witnessed the impossible has softened into something more like wonder, that perhaps he too has found his way to a different relationship with the sacred. My mother's miraculous medal still hangs around my neck, a constant reminder of the thread of guidance that has run through my life. On particularly clear nights, I often sit outside the mission house, looking up at stars that seem close enough to touch in the clear jungle air. In those moments, I feel connected across time and space, to my mother in her hospital bed, to all those who have witnessed inexplicable interventions, to the great mystery that holds us all. I've been asked many times if I was afraid when the gasoline was poured over me, when the match was struck. The truth is complex. Yes, there was fear, primal, instinctual, overwhelming at first, but in the moment of surrender, when I placed myself in Mary's hands, the fear transmuted into something else. Not courage exactly, but a profound acceptance and trust. It was as if I suddenly understood that we are never truly alone in our darkest moments, that protection comes not from our own strength, but from a love that exceeds our comprehension. This understanding has transformed my ministry. I speak differently now about faith, not as a set of beliefs to be defended, but as a relationship to be experienced. Not as certainty, but as trust in uncertainty. Not as a shield against the world's hardships, but as a capacity to find meaning and presence within them. Visitors sometimes ask if I consider myself special or chosen because of what happened. I tell them no. The miracle wasn't about me at all. I was simply in the place where divine protection needed to be made visible, where a community needed to witness their own worth in God's eyes. I was a vessel, nothing more. And yet, I cannot deny that I have been marked by fire, not in my flesh, which remained unburned, but in my soul, which was forever altered by that moment when the impossible became real, when the veil between worlds thinned to transparency, when ordinary time gave way to the eternal now. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I stand at the window of my simple room and look out at the vast canopy of trees stretching toward the mountains. In the rustling of leaves, I imagine I hear my mother's voice and Mary's voice intertwined, reminding me that faith can indeed move mountains, or in this case, save forests and the people who call them home. The sun rises over the Amazon basin, turning morning mist into veils of gold among the trees. Another day begins, filled with ordinary tasks and challenges. But since the miracle, I've come to see that the ordinary itself is miraculous. Each breath, each heartbeat, each moment of connection with another human being, or with the natural world. The extraordinary protection I experienced in the flames was simply a more visible manifestation of the divine embrace that holds us all, always. And so I continue my work here, changed but still learning, witnessed but still witnessing, protected but still vulnerable in all the ways that make us human. My burned clothes remain as testimony to what happened, but the true evidence of the miracle lives in the transformed communities, in the protected forest, in the hearts awakened to new possibilities. Perhaps the greatest miracle is this: that love can appear in the midst of hatred, that protection can manifest in the moment of greatest danger, that the sacred can reveal itself precisely when the profane threatens to consume everything, not as a distant intervention from above, but as an unveiling of what was always present, waiting to be recognized. And so I ask you, do you believe that the Mother of God still acts in our world today? That her protection extends to her children in their darkest hours? If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that miracles still happen, that no situation is beyond hope, that no one is beyond the reach of divine protection. For those who place their trust in the Mother of God, as I did in that moment of fire, know this: she hears, she sees, she protects. And sometimes when we need it most, she makes the impossible possible, turning the flames of destruction into a testimony of grace.